Washington State may be best known for apples and wheat, and more recently wine. However, the small-seeded vegetable seed grown in this state is the foundation for a major share of vegetable production in the United States and worldwide. There are two major seed production areas in Washington, Puget Sound and the Columbia Basin, which together account for more than 15,000 acres of seed production. The major seed crops are table beet, cabbage and related brassicas, carrot, onion, radish, spinach, and many herb seeds such as coriander, dill, and parsley. This presentation will feature the Puget Sound region with a special emphasis on the Skagit Valley. The heart of the Puget Sound seed industry is the Skagit Valley with its rich alluvial soils. The valley is located 60 miles north of Seattle at latitude 49 north, which is similar in latitude to Paris, France. The Skagit River, which spills out of the North Cascades mountain range, is the most dominant feature of the valley and provides approximately 1/3 of the fresh water that enters Puget Sound. Winters are cool and rainy, with 80% of the average rainfall occurring between October and May. Summers average a comfortable temperature range of 19 to 24 degrees Celsius, and together with the low rainfall during this period, makes for excellent seed production conditions. The United States vegetable seed industry began on the East Coast. Over time, however, the hot and humid climate proved less than ideal for many crops. In the late 1880s, the vegetable seed industry began its westward migration towards Washington State, while seed marketing operations remained on the East Coast. Washington's seed industry predates statehood. The oldest seed company is believed to be the Tillinghast Seed Company, founded in 1885 by Alvinza Gardner Tillinghast in Padilla, Washington. Mr. Tillinghast moved to the west from Pennsylvania and began his business initially by purchasing seed from Eastern companies for packaging and sale. After the company moved to LaConner, Washington, Tillinghast began contracting with local farmers for cabbage seed production. In 1985, the Skagit County Washington State University Extension agent Marv Jarman interviewed some of the, quote, old-timers of the seed industry to document and honor the seed industry for the 75th Diamond Anniversary of the Western Washington Horticulture Association. During the next few minutes, you will hear narration by Alf Christensen Jr., whose father emigrated from Sweden and founded Alf Christensen Seed Company in 1926, Austin Swanson, a local seed grower, Dorothy Leckenby, whose family established Leckenby Seed Company, and Clyde Whitaker, who was a WSU horticulturalist from the 1930s through the 1960s. These pictures will show some of the early cabbage, beet, and spinach seed production up to a period of about 1945.
Lilies were one of the largest seed growers in the United States. If they were the largest, I'm sure of that. And they were situated in Seattle. And these ladies would sit there all day long, and these little machines. There was an endless belt with a treadle type. The early ones were treadle type, that they, just like the old-fashioned sewing machine, that they would run them with their feet, and then they really made a big leap forward when they put a little motor on a shaft that ran through all these machines, and they ran with a motor.
Dad and Jim went together and called it the Leckenby Seed, was what an outgrowth of the Lilly Company. So most of what I did was with the Leckenby Seed from 35, 36 on. And before that, I was familiar with the stuff because I had tramped around here with my father. They put seeds in packets and put them right here where people could reach in and grab them themselves. They'd sell more seeds than they would retail, than they would where they had to measure these things out. And so they started putting them in the dime stores and found that, so you know what they do. What was the next development was they made their own racks and just developed them already set up.
This is my father and the Model T coupe that I used to ride in when I was about 6 to 8 years old, and I would go with him out to the different cabbage fields. In the older days, our cabbage was all open pollinated in those days. There was no hybrid cabbage. And while we had no herbicides, our labor costs were, you might say, minimal compared to now. If you paid 2 bits an hour for your labor, you could do quite a bit of that handwork. We staked and strung all our cabbage, our pollinated cabbage, and while our rows were wider, we had quite good yields most of the time. We didn't have the insects to contend with or the disease that we have now.
They had this single row planter and 2 horses pulling it, and a barrel for the water. I've been told that in the old days some of the boys kept their beer and whiskey in the barrel to keep it cool, and one fellow got so drunk that they had to set him in the seat, but he was able to plant anyway by instinct, I guess.
In those days, a man, if he had 10 acres of cabbage, that was a lot because it was all done by hand. It was cut by hand. It was cultivated with horses, and it took time. And the thrashing with those old combines, it was nothing like it is today. They're thrashing cabbage there. They bring it in on sleds with a horse and pitch it off by hand. And it was all hand labor then.
At first, I remember that you couldn't use a pitchfork, so you took one cabbage stake and put under the pile and your hand on top and lifted it into the basket. And when you had a load, then you went up to the thrashing machine and drove alongside, and this basket, or what you could call it, you got on the back side and just tipped it over, and then the cabbage seed rolled out onto a canvas that was laid out in front of the feeder on the thrashing machine.
One of the comments was made by Jim Hobart Sr. at the time that the dominant wind direction was from the southwest towards the northeast, and the threshing of the vegetable seeds or grain seeds, either one, they would point the spout of the threshing machine towards Mount Baker. That would get away from a backfall of the residue and dust from the threshing operation. Some of the main hazards of the cabbage seed production in the 1930 to 40 era was what was called black blight. Sclerotinia was a problem from year to year in the residue of the stalk. And one of the cures that was recommended at the time by the research people was to burn the stacks, and that became a problem during the war because of the restrictions of fire. In the years of 1935 to 45, was a period of when production of vegetable seed particularly was low. It was a known fact that they were low and the need was there. Just what was the cause of the need was an unknown factor at the time. A study was made of the production of cabbage seed and table beet seed, and found that the average production of cabbage seed was about 300 to 400 pounds per the acre, and table beet seed was a production of about 208 pounds. Research work was established because of that need, and the interest was widespread in the Northwest as well as clear back to Washington, D.C. because of the need of production of foodstuffs during and following the war effort. Representatives were sent here from Washington, D.C. and from Wisconsin, and from that start, there was established a widespread interest because of this disease factor, and a man was sent in here to make a study of that. Within a period of about 3 to 4 years, the yield of cabbage seed was raised from that 300 to 400 pounds up to about 1,000 pounds per acre, and the yield of table beet seed was raised from the original 208 average up to about 800 pounds. That created a widespread interest in the production of it, and a little bit of a dollar return to the man who was trying to produce it on the farm. Without that study and that research work, it is doubtful if we would even have the research work going on from the station here known as the Northwest Washington Research Center.
In the post-war era of the 1950s, the vegetable seed industry continued to expand and field sizes increased as many small companies started operating in the area. Farm machinery was improving, which facilitated ground preparation, but the majority of cultural work in cabbage fields was still accomplished with hand labor. Domestic seed companies were the primary contractors, but interest from European companies was starting to pick up. Beet and cabbage seed production remained the most important seed crops. Spinach seed continued to be produced, but did not represent significant acreage. All of the varieties produced were open pollinated. To be historically correct, the first hybrid spinach produced in the Skagit Valley was in 1956, when about 3 acres of hybrid number 7 was grown. However, it wasn't until the start of this decade that hybrid varieties, primarily developed by USDA researchers, started gaining a wider acceptance by the commercial vegetable growers, and as a result, demand for hybrid seed production increased rapidly. Companies such as Alf Christensen, Asgrow, Ferry Morris, Harris Moran, Keystone, Danefelt, and many others were producing spinach varieties such as number 7, 7R, and 424, released by USDA. The primary market for this seed was the canning industry in California. Although the cartoon character Popeye made spinach famous, it is a widely held belief amongst children of this age that most parents use the threat of having to eat canned spinach for dinner as a behavior modification tool. Later in this decade, marketing innovators such as Bob McDonald of Alf Christensen Seed Company were starting to work with Asian seed companies, primarily from Japan. One story goes that McDonald collaborated with Mr. Satoshi Fuji of Fuji Seed Company to cross oriental pollinators with Western-type female lines. 3 crosses were made and given the highly scientific designations of Fuji number 1, Fuji number 2, and Fuji number 3. Mr. Fuji came to visit. He looked at the F1 hybrids and he said, "I choose number 2. To the production department at Alf Christensen, this variety became known as Fuji number 2 and was produced for more than 20 years. During the same time, other Japanese companies, such as Sakata and Taki, started to discover the rich soils and favorable climate of the Skagit Valley, and hybrid spinach production increased rapidly. The increase in spinach seed production brought with it an equally large increase in the need for field labor needed for roguing. One must remember that the female lines used to make the early F1 and F2 hybrids were mostly the, quote, female plants selected out of open pollinated varieties. Some of the so-called female lines contained 20 to 40% male plants that had to be removed in the field. In the late 1970s and 80s, when hybrid spinach seed production in the Skagit Valley was reaching 4,000 acres, or about 1,600 hectares, more than 1,500 school children between the ages of 12 and 16 were being hired to rogue spinach. Most companies used refitted school buses to move the crews from field to field. For many young people, a summer job meant picking spinach, and became a rite of passage until they turned 16, when they could get a driver's license, and to them, a real job. Spinach breeding work that started back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s seemed to accelerate at lightning speed in the 90s. The demand for varieties with new resistance, the shift to more fresh market consumption, and especially the introduction of baby leaf spinach created new challenges and higher quality standards for seed production in the Skagit Valley. Sex-reversing old spinach parent lines and better breeding techniques ended the need for hundreds of school kids being bused to the spinach fields to rogue. Germination rates accepted as minimum went from 85% to 90% and higher. Disease-free seed with no off-types or inbreds were demanded in a marketplace where farmers were sowing 3 million seeds or more and paying rents up to $3,000 per acre to grow crops of fresh spinach. Likewise, seed production demands also increased. Precision seeding machines replaced the old scatter shoes, and the amount of stock seed required per acre dropped 75%. The market changed, and the farmers of the Skagit Valley responded, just as their forefathers had decades before. The 2006 International Spinach Conference, being held here in LaConner, Washington, is both historically significant and timely. It pays tribute to the history of seed production in the Puget Sound region that had its birthplace in LaConner in around 1885, and honors all of those hard-working families that provided the cornerstone of many farming techniques used today. Furthermore, this conference is timely because it marks the 50th anniversary of spinach seed production in the Skagit Valley. From the first 3 acres produced in 1956 to the more than 3,000 acres of hybrid spinach that will be harvested this season, it shows our industry has traveled far and has done so successfully due to the farmers, scientists, and seed professionals, both past and present. On behalf of everyone who has made this presentation possible, please accept our sincere appreciation for your attendance and contribution at the 2006 International Spinach Conference. Let's all work together to make the next 50 years even better. Thank you.